Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah, great. So we've just done our introduction. So yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping. Just keep yourselves on mute, and if you want to speak, you can raise your hand, either actually raise your hand or you can use the little function on Zoom. And if you're having problems with your connection, just turn your camera off. That might, so it doesn't interfere with the rest of the video. And you can always use the chat function to ask any questions. But I think, as there's not so many of us here today, if you do want to ask a question, I'm sure it's fine if you just raise your hand, and we can deal with it as we go along. We've done our introductions. So I'm just going to hand over to Colette now. She's going to take us through the first few slides.
Okay, morning everyone, thanks for that, Karen. So yeah, just going to do a bit of scene setting about why we're here, and why it's so important to be accounting for our environmental impact. So there's been so much in the news lately. I don't think anyone can escape the importance of climate change at the moment, and why we need to act now. So absolutely, the world atmosphere is warming. And the scary thing, I think change is happening faster than wildlife and people can adapt. You know, there's always been some change, and you hear some amazing stories about, you know, evolution in animals, but yeah, they're struggling to keep up at the moment. And there was a lot of talk around when COP was going on, there was a lot of talk about trying to limit the temperature rise. So you may have heard a lot of trying to limit the rise to 1.5 degrees. Which is really what the scientists are saying we need to do. Even at that level, 20 to 30% of species are still at risk of extinction. And if we go above 2 degrees as an average, most ecosystems are going to struggle with that. Go next slide, please, Karen. I sound like Chris Whitman.
It wouldn't do it then.
And yeah, just some stark reminders that this is everyone's problem. It's you know, I think for the last few years it's been something that we thought would happen in sort of low-lying countries like Bangladesh and the Maldives, but it really is starting to take effect here as well as around the world. So we're all aware that we need to take action in our own communities as well. So this is, I don't know how familiar everyone is with the Sustainable Development Goals, but somebody put this together, and it's frequently called the wedding cake slide of Sustainable Development Goals. And it's really showing the relationship between the measures that we need to take to improve the environment, also are absolutely intrinsic on the impact on society and the economy as well, and any actions that we take about improving one of those three is actually helping the others as well. And yeah, it's been put together as an urgent call of what we need to do, so you know, to affect health as well as the environment, and that relationship between them all. And just a little bit about COP. So it was all over the news, but what actually happened in Glasgow a few weeks ago, I can't even remember when it was, and it started in November, wasn't it? So 197 parties signed up to the Climate Pact, and by 2050, 140 countries have pledged to reach net zero. By 2030, more than 100 countries have pledged to reverse deforestation, including Brazil, which is hugely significant for the whole Amazon area. We've got more than 80 countries have pledged to cut methane emissions by 30%, and India pledging to draw 50% of its energy from renewable sources. So there were some great pledges signed up to, but the next slide talks about the not so good aspects of that. So again, going back to the 1.5 degrees average temperature rise that scientists are saying we need to commit to, I have no idea how we're going to get there. Even if we meet all those pledges that we've just talked about, we're still on track for a 2.4 degree temperature rise.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. And if we carry on as we are doing now, we'll be at 2.7. degrees average rise, which is clearly going to have significant effects. And on the last slide, we said more than 140 countries have announced net zero goals, which is great. The not so great news is very few actually have planned of how they're going to get there. So there's an awful lot of work to do. And on the last day of COP, there was quite a lot of talk about phasing coal out. And unfortunately, that wording was changed to phasing it down. Some countries were just not prepared to sign up to anything that was phasing it out. We really do need to end our reliance on fossil fuels. And another issue, lack of funding from rich nations. We've historically caused an awful lot of the damage, and we really need to put some funding into to put that right. So I think that's the last bit from me, Karen. I think it's going on to, okay, that's the big issue. That's why we're doing all this. But what can we in our small organisations do, you know, to reduce our own impact?
Yeah, thanks, Colette. I think it's just, it's so important, isn't it, to remain hopeful in the face of the doom and gloom sometimes that we hear on the news and the scale of the problem before us. But, you know, we can't be defeated, can we? The only way is to be hopeful and to try and make the small changes that we can, as Colette was saying. So this is our 10 steps to accounting for action on the climate crisis. So hopefully some hints and tips for you here to get you started, really, and get you on that journey. So yeah, step one is just that, really, get started. The first step is always the hardest, isn't it, on this kind of thing? And the first step might just be as simple as having a conversation with your staff. You know, if you're part of the team, talk to them at the team meeting. What matters to them about this? How is it relevant to their lives? Collect some ideas, share ideas, you know, maybe create a bit of an action plan around what you want to do. And hopefully you'll find that, you know, there's usually someone who's a real champion for this in any organisation, and having someone who's really going to bring that passion and energy to it is really helpful. In my case, it's just me in my business, so it's all down to me, but that's okay. It's just starting where I can and doing what I can, even though, you know, I am a one-man band, as it were. There's always something you can do. Step two is about aligning with your values. So I know Sophie will be familiar with this slide. This is taken from our SAN guide for social accounting. It's part of one of the first things we look at when we look at social accounting is, you know, making sure that you've got a clear vision, mission, objectives, and that's all aligned to the activities that you carry out. But surrounding this, it is your values. So for social economy organisations particularly, you know, values are so important. We're very driven by these sort of guiding principles that underpin everything that we do. But maybe have a think about those values and reflect on, do any of those values speak to you as we start to think about this climate change agenda? You might have values that are around equality or social justice, but how might that relate to climate justice and the need to take action on things on this sort of global agenda? And that might just be a way of a focal point, again, for talking to your staff about it. If these are our values, how does that suggest that we need to take some action in these areas? Step three is, as you'd expect from a social accounting organisation, we want to get you measuring, because, and it's not just about measurement for measurement's sake, it's because we know that what gets measured gets done, that old adage, because and it drives improvement and it demonstrates that commitment and accountability to stakeholders. And whilst you don't have to measure everything, just setting some measurements in place and starting to kind of maybe set yourself some targets is going to help you to make some progress. I don't know if you want to come in, Colette, because Colette's got some practical examples as we go through this from her work within Withenshaw Housing Association, that because she's just been through this journey recently. So did you want to share some of your learning, Colette?
Yeah, so I think we've done quite a bit of work over the last year, really, on looking a lot more about our environmental impact. And we have worked with a consultancy, but something that we've recently put together across the Greater Manchester housing providers. Fortunately, I work in a sector where we share everything and we're very collaborative, which definitely helps with all of this. But you know, we're just putting something together which is literally starting at, okay, you know, what is our consumption on gas and electricity each month, and how, you know, getting hold of any data that we've got really, and also just saying on that, suppliers are really used to now companies asking for data on that if you don't have access to it, but accessing it from your suppliers. The, you know, the amount of data that our suppliers now give us, they even convert it into CO2 emissions that we're emitting because of our gas and electric. So it's don't be afraid to ask suppliers if you don't know how to get the data. They're definitely used to companies asking for that. Yeah, and then there's the other table as well, but I don't know whether to come to, oh well, I'll talk about it now. So something that I've recently started putting together is kind of something that'll come out of that step one of the conversations with your staff, is thinking about what are all the areas of your business that could be having an impact. So is the transport, is the energy use, looking at your waste, and kind of going through those themes. And what we're trying to do is a kind of step one of all those, looking, is there anything we can do to eliminate the activity? So with travel, like I'm sure many companies, our travel over the last year has reduced absolutely massively because we've all been either on furlough or working from home. So is there something you can do to stop travel? We do so much now on Zoom and online like this that, you know, a couple of years ago we would have all travelled to meet face to face this morning. And if you can't actually eliminate the activity, what can you do to reduce the impact of it? So it's then looking at, well, how you travel to those events is, you know, can you get public transport, or can you walk or cycle rather than that? And it's something easy that we've just started with, of, you know, taking those 2 steps for each of travel, for waste, for energy. And there's something that I'll share in the email that we'll send out afterwards on looking at how we've been able to put that in place, really.
Thanks, Colette. So step 4 is about making the most of the tools that are out there. So, and you might know more, and feel free to share if you've come across anything useful. I mean, traditionally, SAN has always referred to the Green Office Checklist, which we can send a link out to. That's a really simple sort of checklist, really, for if you are, particularly if you are office based, just considering some really simple things like you waste and recycling. Are you switching off lights? You know, who's your energy provider? So it's just a nice little reminder of all the kind of basic things that you can be doing. And it's a good tool to kind of look at, and then maybe look at again in 6-12 months time and see how you've improved. Be Net Zero is a tool that's being developed in Greater Manchester, but although some of it is more applicable to Greater Manchester, it absolutely could be used anywhere. And it's got some great steps to go through if you're looking at reducing carbon emissions in particular. It's a really, really practical guide with lots of links in there to useful bits of information. We will send the links out to these, by the way, afterwards. Another really good place to start is your personal carbon footprint. And I think this is a great thing to do with your staff team, just to go on the WWF website. It's really easy to find, and it's just a simple set of questions that helps you come up with a calculation for your own carbon footprint, taking into account your own energy use, the size of your house, even if you have a dog, you know, all these things impact on your own carbon footprint, and just having an awareness of what it is. And I think it gives you some suggestions at the end of how you might be able to take some action to reduce your carbon footprint. So that's a good one. WWF, so that's the Worldwide Fund, they've also produced a guide called Emission Possible, which is a little bit more detailed. It's more specific to the business sector, really. I've got a slide in a moment that will show you what that looks like. When we were researching this, we came across an organisation called Bioregional, who are a global organisation. They have a number of different toolkits. I'm just trying to remember One Planet Living toolkits they're called. And they have a toolkit and templates and all kinds of handy documents that you can use for what basically any kind of organisation. So there's toolkits in there for schools, for community groups, for even nationally, you know, for countries to consider this, for bigger businesses. So you'll hopefully, you know, whatever size of your organisation, you'll find something in there that's a set of resources that you can use. The Carbon Disclosure Project is more of a way of comparing yourself to other organisations. We'll come on to that, but it's useful because particularly some larger organisations and countries, again, have disclosed their own carbon emissions, etc. on there, and it's a way of being publicly accountable. This is the emission possible. It's a bit blurry on this slide, apologies, but we'll send you the link and you can have a look. But hopefully you can see there how it's just, again, a really simple step-by-step process that you can go through to calculate your emissions and set some targets to reduce. And it's a cyclical process, very similar to social accounting. It's do it for a year and then do it all again is step 12. So step 5, make comparisons. So as I was saying, you know, benchmarking is an important element of social accounting, and it's really helpful to compare your own performance with year on year, so compare with yourself, but also compare with other organisations, perhaps in your sector, or, you know, if like I know for Colette, as part of a housing organisation, you share data, don't you, between yourselves. Is there anything else you wanted to come in at this stage, Colette? Sorry, I know you wanted to talk about the tools as
just
well.
really wanted to say how important this is, because when you start, I mean, you know, I'm still only, you know, a certain way into it. You don't know what good is. So, you know, you get your how much electricity you've used, or you get how many miles you've travelled, but you don't know what good is until you start comparing with other people. And something that came to light, so we, across the Greater Manchester housing providers, we were all trying to, we've all agreed some measures that we're all going to track, and then we can say, you know, as a sector, where we're at and how we can improve each year. And one of the measures was looking at our business mileage. So how much are we all driving around our, you know, our estates and our communities? And how can we turn that into what's the carbon equivalent of that? And it's only when, because a lot of us didn't know what we were doing, we'd add up all the miles, we were told how to convert it into CO2. And some of the numbers were absolutely way out. And it's like, how can you do like 100 times more than someone else? So that benchmarking is a really good sense check as well of, actually, does this mean anything? Because, you know, when you start, you don't know what's good and what's not. So if you can find some other organisations, maybe about, you know, similar to you or the same sort of size, it's really, really useful to do that comparison so that you be more accurate in data as well.
Thanks. So that leads us nicely on to step 6. So it's, you know, I think collaboration is good. It's generally good in whatever you're trying to do. But, you know, it's fundamental, I think. You know, we've seen at COP26, you know, nations trying to collaborate at that, you know, that global level and the complexity of that. But obviously that's essential for us to make any progress. But it's just the same to collaborate, you know, internally within larger organisations to create that sense of we're all doing this together. But externally, as Colette was saying, having that those networks that will help you to share ideas and learn from good practice. So whether that be, you know, if you're a small business, is there a local business network that might be talking about this? Or, you know, I know in Greater Manchester, the Business Growth Hub are leading some work around this, and I'm sure there'll be something locally that you might be able to tap into that's going to help you to meet with like-minded people. Maybe there are industry bodies that you're part of. Maybe there's regional networks or even sector-specific networks that are maybe national. Also, maybe your local authority is doing some work around this. So I know Bolton, where I live, has just produced their climate change strategy, and there's work streams around that. So I've been keen to kind of learn about that and see how I can play my part to kind of reach, you know, help Bolton reach the targets and areas that it's looking to work in. Step 7, I just think it's really important to play to your strengths. So think about, you know, what you do as an organisation, what are some of the easy things that you can tackle it, because you don't have to kind of start with the really, really hard stuff. You know, if you're an organization, I don't know, for example, like a construction organisation, there'll be obvious things you can do around use of materials, supply chain. Housing organisations, you know, maybe this isn't so easy, but obviously you've got the housing stock and the changes that can be made within, you know, insulation and heat storage pumps and all that kind of thing. But so it's just starting with what makes sense for you, really. I'm thinking, you know, it's Dennis, isn't it, that, you know, if you're helping people around moving and transport and getting more active, then, you know, clearly there are going to be some co-benefits there with getting people moving more, and, you know, have reducing environmental impact. Pick things that staff are passionate about. So if you've got a passionate cyclist who maybe wants to set up a cycle to work scheme, then go with that, you know, let them run with that. And use those good relationships with suppliers as well. Is that something that you've done, Colette, working with in your supply chain?
Not so much with our supply chain, but there are some areas where we're certainly maximising our staff involvement. So because we're a housing provider, we own more than 13,000 houses. So when we look at, for our organisation, what is our carbon impact, about 70% of it comes from those houses that we own. And, you know, so quite small amount really from what we do as an organisation. And but so, you know, some staff are saying what we need to be recycling more, you know, and it's kind of something that sends a message. So even though in terms of our impact overall, it's going to be very small from the waste from our offices, it's something that gives that message to staff that we care about this and we want to involve everyone. So yeah, I do think that's important to go with what staff want to do as well.
Great. So step 8 is around that education and training. So something I've done recently is become trained in carbon literacy, or I am carbon literate, if you like, and that's through the Carbon Literacy Project. So it's a day-long course that teaches you, you know, the everything that you need to know really about becoming more aware of carbon emissions and the impact that we all have. But fundamentally, I think it's not just an education tool, it's about behaviour change. So it's about committing at the end of that to some pledges, if you like, that you will take to change in your own life. And I know from my own experience and from speaking to other people who've done that, it's got to be one of the most impactful things I've ever done, because I really did take away those pledges and I've stuck to them, which doesn't always happen, does it? But I mean, there'll be other education and training programs out there, but yeah, I'd just from my own experience, I'd recommend the Carbon Literacy Project. And they have, again, there's different training that's specific to different sectors. So there's one that's targeted at the housing sector, one at emergency services, one at schools, one at communities. So there'll be something that's relevant to your context. And I think that's really helpful. So it's not just about personal change, it's about organisational change as well. I think Sophie and Colette have both had experience of carbon literacy as well, haven't they? Yeah,
I did my training a few months ago now.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. Step 9 is about that verification. So obviously audit is a big part of what the Social Audit Network offers, but we just wanted to tell you a little bit about the W+ standard, which is something that's been developed in partnership with WOCAN. So it's a verification for women's empowerment. So you can see here the different elements of this: time, income and assets, knowledge and education, health, food security and leadership. But I think underpinning that has been a learning that you know, environmental elements are sort of fundamental to this. None of those things can necessarily be achieved in the countries where this standard operates without, you know, also taking into account the impacts of climate change and the way that can be verified as well. I don't know if Anya wants to come in and just share a little bit more. We've got a colleague, Lisa, who has been heavily involved in this standard, but unfortunately she's not very well, so she can't join us today. But if there's anything else to add, Anne.
I think just quickly, so WOCAN is it's an acronym for Women Organisation in Agricultural Communities. So it started off in developing countries, but actually you see reference to an organisation called Astor Global and Vera. Now they're in the United States, and there's a lot of work going on now to try and join up some of the developing world work around environment and climate change and women's empowerment with what's actually happening in developed countries. So in this country, we had a workshop about a month ago to look at how we can sort of apply some of the things coming out of this in the UK. The key thing, maybe the key takeaway from this is the sort of how you, as part of your social accounting, link up the act local, think global agenda from, you know, sort of sustainability campaigning a while ago, is how can you track some, and what the W+ standard does is track and audit actions, you know, in diverse communities, in remote places, very small projects, because they're all important. So how can we make sure that we have that accountability for the little actions that are taking place, and we're not just focusing on, you know, our big headline measures, our, you know, carbon neutral, for example, as a target, but actually we are recognizing and valuing the little things that people are doing as well. So I think that just comes back to what Colette's saying about, you know, where is the interest in your organization? Where are people wanting to act? And then in terms of the verification, this is about checking and tracking back and carrying out, you know, audit trails the same way that financial accountant would do, to check back to ensure the rigor and the impact is being appropriately captured and reported. I mean, that's a whole, you know, separate training course in terms of social audit. But I think, you know, all the way through this, it's just sort of thinking, maybe as part of your social accounting for the climate crisis, is this something that is being accurately and robustly reported, or am I going to get criticised for, storytelling, shall we say? So we do think it's really important that what you put in any report, if it's not verifiable, at least it's robust and it's checkable. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, finally, just the importance of sharing that story, sharing the work that you've done, because it raises awareness, doesn't it? You know, if you're putting things out on your website, or maybe you're putting messages out on social media, it's just shouting out that this is something that we're doing and that maybe others should do too. It's also great just to celebrate, you know, the difference that you've made, hopefully through the work that you might undertake. As I say, it's going to inspire others. Also raising awareness of those co-benefits. I think this is a really important part of reducing carbon emissions, has so many knock-on benefits to health, you know, gets people moving, it gets, improves air quality, and has, you know, which is obviously hugely significant across the globe with emissions from transport, etc., and the impact that has on children's health in particular. It stimulates local economies, you know, perhaps people will start to shop more locally and think about local supply chains, etc. Also about equality and not just global equality, and in the terms of the impact that climate change has disproportionately in developing countries, but also in our own country. And we know that climate change will affect, you know, poorer communities more deeply, potentially. So there are lots of benefits to tackling this stuff and shouting about it. It's been that catalyst for change. And also, if you're shouting about it on your website and including information about this, potentially even when you put out to recruitment, did you know that we're a business or an organization that really cares about this stuff, you're going to potentially get a higher caliber of staff. You know, people are really interested in this, aren't they? And they're really passionate about it. not just young people, but, you know, apparently, you know, research suggests that, you know, it's something that particularly younger age groups are more fired up about, more likely to apply for jobs in organisations that demonstrate that they care about this. But, you know, also it's just the right thing to do for all the reasons that Colette outlined at the start. We can't afford to not do this now. The time is very much now. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a moment, and we'd just like to kind of open this up a little bit now. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask any of us, and you know, we're not the experts in this, so we'd love to know if you've got any examples that you can share. Why is this important in the sector that you work in? What are the drivers for you? And have you done any of this stuff? What have you gained from considering and accounting for environmental impacts already? So Anne's going to put those questions in the chat, I think, and we'll just have a bit of a discussion. I shall stop sharing. There we go. I can see you all properly now. And sorry, apologies, Steve, I got your name wrong when I was talking before.
Okay, I've been called worse.
It's not a question per se, but I just think it's really useful, because I think in kind of the area where I work, where it's going into maybe smaller organisations where they don't think that, because they don't directly do anything that's related to the environment, it could just be a charity for disabled people, and helping them get active. I think it's good using those checklists and those like small things that they can do for them to consider that, you know, everything you do is having an impact. So I think it's really useful to have those tools to hand to share with those organisations.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, we do exactly that. We work with disabled people, disadvantaged people, various other groups. And one of the things that I've done is we have an events template. Now, a lot of stuff is about compliance. Is it accessible? Do we have the right staffing? Have you done a risk assessment? All that sort of thing. But I've started putting things in there about sustainability. I mean, for example, we have a smoothie bike, which we get people to go on and make their own smoothies. So it's, well, have we got recyclable cups? Are we using the right organic vegetables for it? Is it locally sourced? As Karen said, there is a link between a healthy community and a green sustainable community, because people are more likely to walk to a local shop and buy a loaf of bread if they're healthy and active, whereas if they're not, they're more likely to just order a pizza online and not leave the house. So that there is a link between physical activity and health, which is something that we are keen to explore. One of the things that we have done is we work with a company called Play It Green. Now, at the moment, it is just offsetting, which isn't the best way forward. But what they do is provide us with green tips every single week. So what basically happens, we plant one tree every month for every member of staff within the team. There's only 11 of us, so we can do that without it being a huge investment. If we're having a board meeting, for example, where we all have to be in the same place, we'll plant a tree for every member of staff that has to meet in that place. But on top of that, there's lots of tips that we get every week, like using recyclable bottles for shampoo and all sorts of things like that. So it's steps we're taking, but they are quite small at the moment. Another interesting one is more of a point than a question. I went to the University Healthcare Estates and Innovation Conference, which is a bit of a mouthful, because the NHS are obviously trying to decarbonise. They represent 5% of England's carbon emissions. Which is massive, and they're talking about these 40 new hospitals, allegedly new hospitals that are being provided, and they're going to be carbon neutral, and all the work they're doing about decarbonising the existing structure. And my argument back to Fiona Daly, who's leading on this, was, well, rather than concentrating solely on decarbonising what you've got, why don't you decrease the demand for what you've got? If you have a healthier, more active population, you can reduce the demand on primary care by 10, 20%. And if there's 20% less demand, there's going to be 20% less emissions straight away. So there is a real link here between what we do as a charity, trying to get people more active and more healthy, and the carbon impact that we have as a society. And that's basically where the active environment side of Sport England strategies come from. And I sit on the active environment steering group nationally, which is basically why I'm here today, to learn from you guys.
That's so encouraging, isn't it? It's like it is that frustration that we try and tackle these problems so far upstream that, you know, it becomes so acute and difficult. But if we can get further downstream and you know, start to really look at prevention in the way that I think we've not been able to do as much recently, I don't think. It seems to all be sort of firefighting, doesn't it? But it's really encouraging to hear that that's been done. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it's some of it's coming from really interesting sources as well. Cheshire West have put in a bid to support 4 GP surgeries in one of the more deprived areas of the borough to provide infrastructure for social prescribing. So basically, rather than prescribing a pill, they'll say, well, look, you need 6 sessions of physical activity, because we found that there's absolutely no point saying to someone, you need to go for a walk every day for 2 weeks, then come back to me and see how you feel, because they'll just go, yeah, okay, fine, and then not do it. But if they say you've got 6 sessions of cycling at this location, 9 o'clock every Tuesday morning, the same way they prescribe physiotherapy, they will actually do that. But the funding from this is coming from DFT, Department for Transport, rather than NHS, which is really bizarre, but hey, we'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also interlinked, isn't it? Because we know that people being outdoors in green spaces as well has a knock-on impact on mental health and well-being. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Does anybody else? Yeah, Yvonne, hi.
Yeah, I wanted to raise, I'm part of a peer network of small businesses who are all really starting on this journey, and we've had 2 meetings so far. And what's evident is quite a lot of people in this group feel overwhelmed by the challenge. And I think that you know, this is going to be a controversial statement, but I think we've had too much greater, and it's causing people to sort of hide in the cupboard. It also, you know, the idea of you know, the world overheating. It's not that people no longer believe it, because I think they do. I think it's more they feel overwhelmed and disconnected because of that. So the last 2 meetings that I've been to, there's been quite a lot of, I think, people just trying to get to grips with what they can do. The other thing I'm picking up is that your very large companies, you know, let's say, for example, I'm in the Northeast, so let's say Nissan, are rippling down through all of their supply chains. Can you tell me what the emissions is in your whatever? So one of the people on the call yesterday makes a form of packaging. So realistically, that packaging has probably gone to a component manufacturer who's supplied into probably a larger component manufacturer who's supplied into Nissan. So they're now reaching down into very, very small businesses who haven't got a clue. So, and because the big guys are trying to, they're trying to sort out their scope 3, but in reality, they're just passing the problem. And the wee people are just sat there going, I have no idea. You know, and really sort of, what can we do to address that feeling of being overwhelmed? Well,
sorry, I was on mute then. Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. Yeah, I can see Colette and Anna's got their hands up. But yeah, I see that all the time too, Yvonne. So it's a really useful point. If you'd like to go first, Colette, let's go.
Yeah, so there's something about feeling overwhelmed that I'll come back to later about me personally, but in terms of suppliers, so something that we're just signing up to across the Greater Manchester housing providers. I don't know if you've heard of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, but
no,
it's basically for that. So the housing providers are going to sign up, and it's basically, you know, an online training tool that we'll then make available to our supply chains. So particularly because, you know, we're trying to work more with smaller businesses and not just, you know, the big developers, but certainly, you know, down the supply chain, we want to work with smaller businesses. We understand that a lot of people don't know where to start. So we invest in this, and then our supply chains will be able to benefit from it, and they'll be able to have access to loads of online training for free to them. So, you know, sort of similar to the carbon literacy, but there's all sorts of topics that choose. And there's loads. I mean, it's expensive to sign up, which is why you need bigger organisations to sign up to it and make it available. You know, when you look at the current customers, they are huge companies. But it's something that we really want to do. We really want to help our supply chains do that, and we see it as a really useful investment for us as larger organisations to make that available. So yeah, I don't know if you know, I suppose it depends what sector you're in, but looking at that, really looking at up the supply chain, is there anything they can do to benefit the smaller organisations?
Thanks, Colette. Anne?
I think what I was going to add, Colette, that's really useful. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
That's really good. Thank you. I think what I was going to say was, and as an example of some of the work we're doing in Greater Manchester is going to say keep it simple and keep your targets simple. I think, and people can get bogged down in lots of measures and targets. So I think what we've been trying to do is get everybody aligned around some sort of net zero time frame and target. So it's almost like you can see what it is you're aiming for actually in your organisation. What do you then need to do to get there? And it comes back to what Colette was saying earlier on, I think, about, almost like that repeat self-analysis and assessment. So, if Greater Manchester has set a target which has been agreed by the LEC and it's been agreed by the public sector, it's been agreed by the voluntary sector, 2038 carbon neutral, but each organisation will be on a different journey to go there. So it's almost like, what we've been trying to focus on is, okay, we've got one target, actually let's work with organisations to look at what do they need to do and how can they work together to support each other. So, I mean, in our work as a combined authority, we've just started by asking all our suppliers, what does the journey look like for you, and what are the steps and what are the things that might be helpful to get you there, and then trying to help. We're going to start tracking stuff and helping them to track stuff. So, but yeah, trying to keep it as simple as possible, because some of and I think that the things Karen was showing in terms of some of those toolkits or places to get help, it's starting with those simple ones, really, isn't it? The simple ones, the theory works the same for any size of organisation.
Would you mind if I sneaked in a supplementary question? Because specifically where I think they're feeling overwhelmed is scope 3. But I think it's not that bad to wrap your head around scope 1 and 2. Once you've sort of worked it out, you can do it. And there is guidance that says small businesses don't need to worry about scope 3, essentially, because it's too hard. But what I'm picking up is that businesses sort of want to do a really good job, particularly for your manufacturing engineering. They don't not do things, take things very seriously. And they're sort of looking at scope 3 and just finding that very overwhelming. And I wondered if anybody had anything specific on that.
And not everyone might be familiar with what scope 3 means. I've got a vague idea. Would you?
Oh, do you want? I can do this. Yeah. I know quite a bit now. So, scope 1 is the fuel you burn. Best way to describe it. So scope 1 in your house will be the gas and possibly the fuel in your car. So that is fossil fuels you are actively burning. Scope 2 is the burning of fossil fuels which you have effectively commissioned. So that's your electricity supply, unless it's green. Scope 3 is everything else, literally. Anything that doesn't fit into those earlier categories sits in scope 3. So it's massive. It's if you think about your workplace, it's everything from the coffee, the equipment, the furniture, anything that you're buying or consuming that has a footprint. And I think it's that anythingness that makes it quite challenging.
Yeah, I mean, just from my own experience and from working with some of those smaller businesses, I think it is what we were saying earlier about just starting where you're at and, you know, keeping it meaningful to your own organization. So, and just being more mindful generally, I think, just, you know, if you're making choices about where to buy your coffee from, you know, do a bit of research around that. If you're making choices about office space that you need, think about where you choose to do that and how, and is the good transport links and things like that. But I suppose you've just got to bite off bits one bit at a time, haven't you? And just encourage people to feel that that's okay, because it is, there's nothing worse than feeling overwhelmed by this, is there? And just feeling, then you bury your head in the sand and you feel like everything is you know, it's too hard, it's pointless. I was just going to share this. I dashed off to my bookcase because this is a really good book. It's called Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. I also can send the reference around to it later. Someone else signposted me to this, and I have to admit, I've not read all of it yet, but it's a really, really interesting book, and it's very much about doing things at a community level that are going to have that. It's a bit like what Anne was saying, you know, at local, think global, you know, because if we work together as at a community level and try and be a catalyst for change, then these stories are all about where that did actually instigate bigger change. And it's just, I always keep that phrase active hope with me, because it's not enough just to be hopeful. It's about kind of actually moving towards action that's going to create change. But yeah, just remaining kind of positive and optimistic where we can, really. Yeah, is that helpful? Yeah,
I think the bit that I don't want to labour it because other people want their turn. I think more just as a reflection, I think the bit that's the overwhelming bit is their attempts at quantifying the emissions in scope 3. So I think, yeah, once, because obviously you've got to quantify to then decide what to do about it, and they're getting stuck there. So I'll just stop there.
Maybe that's something that we can continue to consider and do a bit of research around, and to see if there's any good practice out there around some of that. And if anybody has anything to share around that, I don't know if that's something you've come across with any of your clients, Sophie, and with the connectives.
I mean, scope 3 is always the most difficult one, because it's your indirect emissions, it's what your supply chain are doing themselves. And so I think what you said, Karen, is consider your supply chain and make like ethical choices and green choices throughout your supply chain. But I know a lot of the bigger organizations, they struggle with it. And a lot of it, the advice at the moment is for those that you cannot change or you can't reduce, is offsetting, is the current advice, which I know that's not the ideal, but I think when it comes to scope 3, there's limited choice in being able to reduce those.
Thanks.
Just as a little tip from experience, maybe. So the Greater Manchester Combined Authority have, you know, got the same problem. I think we've got 2,000 suppliers or something, and so the first thing that we're trying to do is baseline our existing supply chain, which is a challenge in itself, because they're hugely diverse in size and nature, and include voluntary sector organisations. So that's the first thing we're doing. But the other thing that we've done is changed our onboarding process. So everything that starts new, as part of the onboarding of you know, a new supplier, the whole process, it's almost like we're asking those questions. We're asking them in procurement. We're trying to understand what they're doing around net zero and things like that. But we're also, it's almost like they know that if they do business with us, we have expectations. So it's sort of setting it out at the beginning rather than, so it's a little bit of trying to work retrospectively, but actually a sort of a point where we've said, from now on, we want to work with these types of suppliers. So it's not just about environment. We're asking questions about employment standards. We're asking questions about, values. We're asking questions, so we're asking other questions. We're asking whether they pay the real living wage, for example. So, but doing that right from the beginning, so that there is some sort of expectation for new staff. Because at the end of the day, we're going to struggle with our existing supply chain to reach all 2,000 organisations and have them all lined up and measuring and all doing the same thing and things like that. So I think that's just a tip from an organisation that's busy trying to do this.
Top tip, Anne, thanks. Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. We're just 1 minute to 12. That's gone quickly.
Colette's waving at me, Karen.
Oh, sorry, Colette.
Sorry, I'll keep it really brief, but I'll find what I can share, certainly to help you in that. But I think one thing is that's the point where we want these networks and other organisations that we can talk to who are going through the same thing. But yeah, we looked at our scope 3. I mean, as a housing provider, virtually everything we do is scope 3 because our properties are in scope 3. So at one point we were like, should we just start with scope 1 and 2? And we're like, that represents nothing of what our organisation is having an impact. So yeah, I've recently done some work in it, so I'll certainly share what I can find on that with you after.
Thank you. So what we'll do at the end of this, we've mentioned a few different things here. We'll collate everything together into an email, which will get sent out. Perhaps we'll add some, maybe put that on our website as well, maybe add to the bottom of the blog. So 6 months ago, we did a first run of this workshop in a similar way, and I wrote a blog off the back of that with Colette's help. So that is already on the Social Audit Network website, so we'll send a link to that, but we'll add some more to it maybe as well. But yes, thank you so much for your time, everybody. Thanks for your contributions as well. Hopefully it's been helpful. And you know where we are. You've got our email addresses, so please do drop us a line if you need any more help or support, or you want to reach out to anyone else that's on the call today.
Thank you, everybody.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks. Happy Christmas, everybody.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Jump on today. Yeah.
Good to see everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Karen, we've got a colleague, Lena, who's just joined right at the... Lena, are you there?
Hi,
David.
yes.
Lena, I think are you not in the UK? Because unfortunately the timing, you joined an hour late.
No, I'm based out of Paris, and I think that's the issue.
Oh no.
Sorry about that.
No, we have recorded this. Actually, I'll just stop recording. We have recorded this so that we can send